So, Nuremberg is another adaptation of the Nuremberg trials, directed by James Vanderbilt. And much like the previous film, The Judgment at Nuremberg, this film also has a pretty big cast of characters like Rami Malek, Russell Crowe, Colin Hanks, Richard E. Grant, Michael Shannon, a whole bunch of different actors here, and they're pretty great here. Obviously, this is a very timely film. There are a lot of people who are going through hard times right now, and they're fed up with the Trump administration. And the one thing that keeps coursing, I think, through a lot of our minds is when all this is over, there's got to be a Nuremberg trial. So it's perfect time to bring up Nuremberg again and have like another fresh adaptation from James Vanderbilt. Now, compared to something like Judgment at Nuremberg, which I felt locked you into that trial very deeply and considered everything about it. There's a little bit more of an external quality to how Vanderbilt frames the famed trial, and it's both. It feels like it's on like a familiar track, but at the same time, it does feel like it's going to some places that are not as explored that need to open up a little bit more. Because before the trial even starts, like I think it's pretty long into the film before like the trial is underway. But before we get to that point, we've got everybody trying to decide, how should we proceed with this? Like, is this going to be a good idea to hold the trial for the Nazis that we've conquered during World War II? How is this going to be seen by the rest of the world? Is this going to backfire on us? Could it make us look bad? And could it, stoke, Nazis to kind of like rise to power again? And these are all like real concerns about, how to proceed next. Because you look on the outside, you just think, okay, yeah, put them on trial, find them guilty for their crimes, and execute them. That's the way that it should be. But there's all these little details that have to go into it to make sure that everything is kind of by the book and that they're not being as terrible as the Nazis here. So there's a lot of those concerns that are shared by the British prosecutor of David Maxwell Fyfe here, played by Richard E. Grant, and the American prosecutor of Robert H. Jackson, played by Michael Shannon. And a lot of the film, when I say the film sticks to a rigid track, I mean the characters are mostly just talking about the trial. How is this going to go down? How are we going to assemble it? Like, in every single scene, like the opening scene with Michael Shannon, like he's just like hanging out, having a drink late at night, and he's still like talking like, oh, this is going to be bad. Oh, let's get another drink. Oh, what if we did this? What if we did this? Like everyone has their minds constantly on the goal here, which is, it keeps the film on track, but it also doesn't give you much time to kind of appreciate a lot of what goes into like the character motivations here. Because the only characters that we get to spend the most time with, and we get more of a psychological perspective, is the Nazi leader of Hermann Göring, played by Russell Crowe, and the psychologist Douglas Kelly, played by Rami Malek. And you get to understand both these characters a lot more. You get to see them essentially play mind games with each other. Like Malek is trying to understand Göring and how he can be so calm and collected in prison while all the other Nazis are kind of freaking out, trying to find ways to kill themselves, trying to find a way to escape, just, prove their innocence, just shout back. And here's Göring just like, everything's cool, don't worry, I'm gonna find a way to escape that noose, don't you worry. And so Kelly is just trying to figure out, like, why is he so calm, and what does he know, and can we find anything about him that we can use against him? But as Douglas Kelly starts learning more about Göring, he starts meeting his family, he starts seeing a more complete picture of a human being that he almost sympathizes with him when, another psychologist comes in to kind of, throw things a little bit off balance with, which I believe was Colin Hanks' character. So there is this kind of like back and forth of this mind game here. And of course, like, everything gets unraveled once the trial happens. And then there's the most controversial scene in the film where they show real footage from inside a concentration camp of the dehumanizing aspects of how the prisoners were treated and how they were starved, and their decayed bodies and all the corpses that had to be like shoved around and dismantled. Just the most inhuman aspects of the Holocaust are presented in that moment. And it's shocking and it's disgusting. and Douglas Kelly just like leaves the room. He's just like, I can't watch this. It's like, here was like Goring knew about this stuff, and I'm here trying to figure him out. It's like, why am I letting him lead me along? It's like, why was I so stupid? Why did I fall for this? And I think that's ultimately Goring's plan, is just to deceive. And by the time you actually realize what he's done, feels like it's almost too late to do anything about it, and just be disgusted by it. In fact, I have heard that some people have watched that scene in the theater and they wanted to leave. They were so disgusted by it. It's like, yeah, you should be disgusted. And if you want to leave the theater, I wouldn't blame you, because that's what Douglas Kelly does in the film. It's like, yeah, you should feel sick to your stomach when you see this footage, and it should, make you want to prosecute these guys even more, even to the degree that a lot of them just want to see them hung, just pay for their crimes in any way possible. And I think on that track, I think just like the dynamic between Kelly and Goring, I think, is the most fascinating aspect of the film. And it is pretty interesting how the two of them try to grapple with with evil itself, and how they try to both understand it and manipulate it and try to string each other along as it goes. And some of the characters just kind of end up just stating like all the obvious here. Like, Michael Shannon is great, but he's mostly there to deliver monologues. Like, even when he's not in the trial, like there's a scene where he brings Douglas Kelly to like the scene where Hitler rose to power, and just, like, this is the enormity of the situation, and these are the stakes, and we need you to do your job here so that we can ensure that Nazis don't rise again. And then you have John Slattery, who's just kind of barking orders as Officer Andrus here. He's just, and that's pretty much all he is. Like, he does have a concern, and he does kind of look down his nose at Kelly and doesn't really like that he's not, being more vicious rather than being more human, even though that's kind of like a more interesting aspect of the film, I think, is to see more of the humanity in these characters rather than just seeing it as, a bunch of guys who gotta like prosecute Nazis. It's like, yeah, that's satisfying in its own right. But, if you're going to spend a lot of time with these characters, you feel like there should be something more here. You should be able to understand them on a level that's not just, a bunch of monologues and towering speeches and just, courtroom drama. That is pretty good, mind you. But that it feels like there should be a little bit more here. So I was a little bit conflicted about the film. Like, it's not great, but it does get the job done. I say, yes, it is essential viewing just to remind yourself of the Nuremberg trials. And on that aspect, I kind of started looking at the film in terms of a classroom movie. And what I mean by that is, like, obviously a historical film like this could be used in a classroom to kind of bring more of history to life. And you kind of look at it on a degree of, what details is it presenting, and is it actually making history become more alive and apparent in that moment? And I think for the most part, Nuremberg does that. I think it does feel very relevant, and it does highlight how, even when you conquer Nazis, the war isn't over, and not just because you need to bring them to trial, but also because that hatred can fester in different ways. And that actually made me love the ending of the film a whole lot more, which doesn't end on this hopeful note of just like, oh yes, we succeeded, we executed all the Nazis, and job well done. It doesn't end with that. It doesn't even end with like a simple epilogue. It ends with Douglas Kelly going on the American radio to stress that, look, Nazis are going to come back. And next time, it won't be with a swastika. They'll find something else. They'll attach themselves to a different symbol, a different movement, but it'll essentially be, the same fascist structure. It'll be about, all about nationalism. It'll be about stressing a mythic past. It'll be all about restoring greatness once again. It'll come back. And I love that aspect of the ending, because it feels very relevant now, because it's an aspect to consider once, the reign of Donald Trump is over as well. Where do we go next from there? Because fascists will come back, but the next time won't be with a swastika. and it won't be even with a red hat. It'll be with something else, and it's that stressing that you need to pay attention more. You need to be more mindful of what fascists are doing, the mind games that they play, and how psychologically they can work their way into genocide. And that is really a very important point to stress, that I honestly didn't mind most of like the rigid courtroom nature that a lot of the film goes through. It does feel like the film is going through a lot of the motions here and there of just, trying to like stick as close to history as possible. But for the most part, I think it works. Like, there are some good performances here. I think Russell Crowe just melts into the role of Goring. Like, you don't see him as anything else but just this big blob of evil who's just like constantly plotting and always has a way to like always has this devious nature on his face. And just the way that like Rami Malek is he does have kind of like that look of someone who wants to get inside your head. And I love how he plays up that aspect of himself. So their performances, I think, really make the film work, as opposed to this greater ensemble that is mostly just there to kind of fulfill their duties and not much else than that. So thematically, the film is important, and it's a great film on that merit alone. I just wish that there were a few more human moments, as opposed to just, stressing the just talking about the trial. Like, it feels like there's got to be a little bit more there, and you do get a little bit of that humanity with Kelly and Goring. But I wish there was a little bit more of that instead of just sticking to the rigid historical track. But yeah, thematically, Nuremberg is a very important and poignant film for the moment, and on that level alone, I can recommend it. But it becomes a little easier to recommend with some strong performances by Rami Malek and Russell Crowe. So yeah, Nuremberg mostly gets the job done of stressing one of the most important trials in human history.